Morning guys, Dr. Ken Nordberg here again. During the past few years I've created quite a few YouTube seminars, and I've been trying my best to answer all questions that I get as a result of those seminars. And I've had several of them recently from bow hunters, obviously, because they wanted to know where to hunt in September. And up to this point we've been talking about like November hunting. Well, I used to be a bow hunter, a real avid bow hunter, hunted deer and bear with my bow, and I really enjoyed it. And I can understand why the average bow hunter, if you haven't been at it for many years, might be confused about where to start hunting in September. So let's talk about that today. Now, one thing about September is that there's going to be some gradual changes going on throughout that month. Part of it is going to be because of global warming. You know, we're having a problem with that, and it's getting worse, and it's actually been affecting our whitetails for about 15 years now. But most guys, if you haven't been hunting for 20 years, you don't realize that these changes are going on. It might seem from year to year everything is pretty much the same. But if you're going to hunt in September, there are some changes that are going to be going on, and you need to be aware of that. Now, first thing that happens right at the beginning of September, the first thing that's going to happen that's going to have something to do with your hunting success is bucks are going to be shedding velvet. And that usually happens right around the 1st September. And remarkably, moose all the way up to Alaska are shedding velvet during the same period, these few days. Usually it takes about 1 to 3 days, well, more like 3 days, for them to get all the tatters of velvet off their antlers. And they're anxious to do that because about a week before, during the last week in August, the blood flow to that velvet that's covered the antlers during their development, that blood flow shuts down, and so the velvet starts to virtually rot, smell, and it attracts all kinds of insects, flies and wasps, yellow jackets, insects like that like to eat meat. And after that blood flow turns off, they're still feeling in that velvet. And at this point, bucks they don't know quite what to do. Maybe I should get rid of the velvet today, or I'll wait a little longer, because they're still feeling in there. And those darn flies and wasps get onto that velvet, and they start chewing on it. It hurts. So finally they get to the point, I just got to get rid of it. I got to do it right now. And usually they're laying in their bed when this happens. They're laying there quietly, chewing their cud, you know, like they usually do after feeding. And these bugs are getting worse and worse around their heads. And finally, I've had enough. They jump up and they'll run over a small bush or tree and start rubbing their antlers on it. And they might run over some branches that are hanging down in a nearby tree and thrash their antlers back and forth through that, and or deep grass, thrash it back and forth, do their best to get rid of all the velvet off their antlers, get rid of those bugs that are bothering them. Now, here's a picture of a buck that was in the process. He's got about 80% of the velvet gone, and that's usually the way they look on the very first day that they start shedding velvet. It's going to take them a couple more days to get rid of all those little tatters on their antlers before they're finally gone and they're free of all these bugs that have been chasing them. But that happens now. Now, there's two things that they want to do. As soon as they shed velvet, number one is they want to know what's been going on in my home range. They want to explore. They haven't been out there all summer. It's been like they've been locked in jail by their developing antlers. There's a lot of feeling in there, and they don't want to injure it because that hurts. And I don't know if they worry about disfiguring their antlers if they get injured while they're in development. but that can happen, and that can mean the difference between being a dominant breeding buck this year or not. And so, anyway, they're pretty careful about those antlers during development. Now, once the velvet's gone, now, they're free to walk through anywhere they want in their home ranges, and if they brush against tree branches or leaves or whatever, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't bother them. So they're anxious to find out who's here. You know, I haven't seen them all summer. During the antler development period beginning in about the 1st of May to the 1st of September, they don't move much. They stay home, they eat and drink water. They always bed close to water, so they don't have to travel far during the summer months all this time. Now, in farm areas, you might see these bucks out in open fields feeding all summer long, and with velvet, and then all of a sudden one day there's no more velvet on those antlers. Well, that's what's happening right now. So they want to explore, so they're going to be moving a lot. Now, it would be pretty hard to try to predict where those bucks are going to be moving during this period, because that can be pretty haphazard, going this way and that for a while. Now, the second thing they want to do is try their new antlers out on other bucks. This period, this next 30 to 45 days, they're going to be fighting with other bucks, antlers engaged. They're pushing matches, and the loser is the buck that gets pushed backwards and losing ground while during these shoving matches, and finally has to jump away because it's hurting. The head is being twisted to one side, or they're fearful of being punctured by the opposing buck's tines. So, but whenever one loses ground or has to jump away, they've lost. The buck that went, he's higher in their new pecking order. Bucks have their own pecking orders in each square mile that they live with, and they have to fight with all these other bucks to gain the highest position possible in that pecking order, because the one who beats up all the other bucks repeatedly during that period of time gets to be the dominant breeding buck of the area. Now, whereas this exploring might not be predictable and give you a chance to set up a tree stand somewhere where you're most likely to see that buck moving around during the daytime, this business about battling with other bucks does become predictable. It usually most of that fighting occurs, some of it will occur when two happen to meet while they're exploring, and they might battle a little bit. Usually it's short term in the beginning, maybe it'll last 10 seconds or so, 15 seconds, and that's about it. Clickety click click, and then away they go. But later in September it gets to be more serious, and these fights to get more long lasting. But by the end of September and into mid-October, it's been pretty well established who the dominant breeding buck is going to be during the coming breeding seasons. So, but during that time, most of that fighting occurs in feeding areas. Now, during this period, all the way from now until mid-October, these bucks are going to gather together in favorite feeding areas. Now, here's a picture. Take a look at this one. There's 5 antlered bucks in this farm field. They're feeding in this pasture area, and they're all bucks. Every one of them down there is a buck. Now, this is typical. It doesn't matter whether this is amongst black-tailed deer in California or white-tailed deer in Wisconsin or wherever. During this period, they gather together and feed together. And it's kind of funny the way it works. They'll feed complacently, not paying much attention to one another while they're feeding, and then later in the feeding period, like say maybe 9 o'clock or 9, 10 o'clock in that area, two of them will come close together, and it almost seems like an accident, and they'll bump antlers. It'll be a click. Well, whenever one buck engages the antlers of another buck, that's a challenge to battle. And they all love the battle. Oh, let's go to it, you know. And it might, like I say, not be serious in the beginning, but it gets to be more serious later on. Now, one of the things you have to remember when you're hunting mature bucks, bucks, say bucks 4.5 to 6.5 years of age. Those are the true trophy class bucks in the woods. Bucks at age 5.5 are in their prime. 6.5 bucks in the wild, their antlers might not be quite as big as they were when it was a 5.5. At 4.5, they might not be quite as big either, but at 5.5, they're at the very best. Now, one thing about bucks 4.5 to 6.5 years of age is this: in your hunting area, there's 1 or 2 in every square mile. So, that are true trophy class bucks. Now, one thing about those bucks is they've been avoiding you for 4.5 to 6.5 years, and they're very good at it. They know more about you than you possibly could ever learn about them. They know where you hunt. Now, what that means is, you know, if you keep going back to the same spot every year, they know that's you. You're in that spot. Year after year, you know, it gets to be fall, and by mid-October, leaves are starting to change color and falling to the ground and that kind of thing. And they know hunting is about to begin, or it has begun. And so they start being cautious about places where they found you in the past. And the first time a buck of that age comes close to where you are, where they found you in previous years, is they're going to pass downwind and check for your existence there by sniffing the air. Now, it doesn't matter how high you are above the ground. All your scent from that tree stand spreads out through a cone-shaped area and touches the ground within 25 to 50 yards, depending on how strong the wind is. But it touches the ground, and the part that touches the ground keeps spreading out as it goes downwind. And any deer that's in that triangular area through which your scent is spreading out is going to absolutely identify. These bucks, when they smell you the first time, they're like maybe in a week or two, and you go hunting, they're going to say, that's you again, you're back again, and you're sitting in the same place. Now, what could be easier for them to keep avoiding a hunter that they know is in a certain spot every year? That's an easy job for them. You know, early last May, my son John and I put out a number of trail camps to try to determine how our deer and wolves fared last winter. Put out a whole bunch of them. And speaking of how older deer, including does, can get used to things you do, so they really have you pegged, you know. Those cameras were showing us that. Almost within hours, maybe an hour, after putting out some of those cameras, deer showed up and walked right up to the camera and looked in it. At places where we've never had them before. I mean, they saw the cameras, they knew right away this was something human. I've even had bears do that. You say, oh boy, what a place for hunting bear. Those bears, you know, they can live 30 years, and they can get to be really smart about staying on him in time. But I had bears right here looking in that into the lens of the camera. Like, they knew all about it, come back the next day and look in there again, and then you don't see them there anymore. And they realize, oh, it's this kind of a danger sign, you know, having something like that there. So, boy, they can even get used to avoiding you because of your trail cams. And that really surprised me. I've never really noticed that before this year. We went back there in July, end of July, to pick up some of these cameras. So we had over 4,000 pictures to look at from those cameras. And really surprised that here's deer and even bears looking right in the camera. It was obvious they knew this was something different, and it probably had maybe, you know, if they came there early, they found our trail scent there and everything right there. So right away they knew here's a spot that humans like to be, you know. So I'm sure some of those deer took that seriously and decided, well, I'm not going there anymore. That kind of thing. You know, along the same line, you know, it's getting to be pretty common practice now for most deer hunters to use trail cams to try to help figure out where to hunt deer. And you get a picture, you put a trail cam up by a deer trail, and pretty soon you get some pictures of deer walking by, and maybe one of them is one of these big bucks exploring. And you think, oh boy, but I got a spot. Just like that buck is nailed to that trail, and you're going to see him, but he may not come by there at all during the rest of the fall. He might be busy in other places. Chances are not very good. But you might also be thinking this: I'm going to lure them to my stand site. Now, it's pretty amazing what hunters, they were pretty industrious, pretty clever, doing all kinds of things to lure a buck to a stand site. And it kind of makes it easier. You think, well, I don't have to scout much. I get a picture of a deer on my camera, and oh, boy, this is a spot. And to make sure he comes by here, I'm going to use buck lure scent, doe urine with pheromone that does produce when they're in heat. And you know how long people have been doing that? Since the middle 1980s. And want to know how many hunters have been using it? About 15 million every year. Can you imagine that there are bucks anywhere that are that age, those older age groups, that haven't been through the business of discovering humans are using that scent to attract them somewhere? They wouldn't even be 4.5 to 6.5 years of age if they didn't know all about hunters using lure scents. Or a hunter using a grunt call. How many of you can be sure that any grunt you make on a grunt call is so good that all those bucks in the woods, those absolutely don't realize that you are a human making that sound? Now, I'm pretty good at it, and in the days when these grunt calls first came out, I attracted several really nice bucks using a grunt call. And even doe, one time with the buck following her, a dominant breeding buck, got that one real easy. So that's a lure. Or people using rattling antlers, that used to be really popular. You don't see that so much anymore. Well, how come? Because bucks have learned that those Texas tickles people were doing are banging those antlers together. That's fake. That's a human making those sounds. They've learned humans make those sounds. And once they do, and you're hunting, they never forget that. And bucks that never forget that get to be 4.5 to 6.5 years of age. And those are the bucks you're trying to lure. Nowadays, I hate to say that, but it's so true, and I want to give you some good advice, really good advice. If you're using a buck lure scent, or a rattling antler, or a call, or a bleat, doe bleat, or any of those kind of things, there's hardly a buck in America today that's 4.5 to 6.5 years of age that doesn't know that's a fake, that's a human making that sound, those sounds, or whatever, or that's a human using that lure scent. And I won't go into all that, but the biggest problem with people using lure scents, you don't pay any attention to the wind direction, wherever that odor is going, away from your stand site, your odors are going along with it. And the buck smells that, and they smell there's a human over there. And they don't have to come over there to see if there's actually a human there. They can smell you over there. Because the only time they're going to respond to the lure scent is when they're downwind. They smell it downwind. Well, your odors are going there too, spreading out over a wide area. So they smell that. They've learned that. Back in the 80s, they didn't put those two things together, a human using it and those producing this scent. And man, did that lure scent work. Back in the 80s, all the way into the early 90s, that was a dynamite way to attract big bucks to stand sites. It really was. It was really good. But today, it might be making it a lot easier for those bucks to stay away from you. Oh, that's a human. I'm going to stay away from that place because there's your odors. And the other reason is most of the store-bought doe and heat lure scent in bottles doesn't produce the odors that come normally from a doe's body. Next time you have a doe hanging up in camp, sniff that doe. The hair of a doe is producing lots of deer-like odors. And that pheromone is not the only odor that comes from a doe. And if that buck is over there and he sniffs there and he smells it, but I don't smell the doe. I don't smell the body of the doe. He's not going to come there. Today, it's gotten to the point that my sons and I have gotten to the point where we don't even use those things anymore. Because we've learned two things. One is the more you use those things, the more likely it is you're not going to see a big buck at a stand site. Okay, well, I was going to say there's a couple of reasons, older bucks are able to distinguish between what's real and isn't. Like what is a real doe in heat smell like, and what doe and estrus lure scent out of a bottle smell like. There's a difference there, and partly it's because human scent is traveling with it. But that's true of a lot of things. Even food plots. That's gotten to be big. Boy, it's amazing the amount of work people put into making food plots nowadays. I'm seeing pictures on the internet, people sending me pictures on Facebook of their latest food plots, and pictures of deer out there feeding, big bucks feeding out there, and they're excited about it. Can't wait for the deer hunting season to begin. But like I was saying now, during this September, things are going to start changing. And there's two reasons why they're going to change. One is, this is the month when whitetails start losing their summer fur and growing winter fur. Until end of September, when their winter fur is fully grown, global warming isn't bothering them. It can get pretty hot in the summer, but most deer can take it. They might not move around much during the day and move only at night when it's especially hot, which is smart. But they aren't bothered so much by global warming, meaning unseasonably warm temperatures when they have their summer fur on. But when their winter fur, by the end of September, that winter fur is fully developed and it has a cottony underlayer. And up here in Minnesota, this fur keeps those whitetails from freezing to death in long periods of 45 degrees below zero. So that is pretty good insulation that fur provides. Well, the bad thing about global warming is when it gets to be excessively warm in the end of September and October and November, when firearm hunting season is open and does are in heat starting in our area in the 3rd of November for 2 weeks. That's the first period of breeding. If the temperature in my hunting area is over 50 degrees during the day, they aren't going to move around all day. That's just too warm for a big buck to do anything, or most other deer, when they got their winter fur. So all of a sudden global warming starts getting in the way of what we're going to be doing, the way you hunt from now on until global warming is cured. I can't foresee the day that that's going to happen in my lifetime, especially being 87 years of age, but you got to expect that. So if you're going to bow hunt this time of year, if I was bow hunting, the first thing I go looking for is a feeding area. Now, they're going to be eating grasses and clover, and there's farm fields, alfalfa and corn and soybeans and whatnot. You'll be able to see where they are. But up in the woods, it's going to be a little different. There'll be kind of areas that are kind of open, and there's grass, and maybe red clover growing in that grass, but lots of grass growing, green grass. And then you go out there and look around when you're scouting and look for tracks and droppings. Now, you go out there and start looking around and you start finding tracks out there that are big enough to be those of a big dominant breeding buck, for example, or a buck, say, 4.5 to 6.5 years of age. He's going to have bigger hoofs than other deer. You know, a lot of people don't realize that, but it's an important part of being a buck hunter, being able to distinguish where that buck is feeding or bedding or walking on the trail, whatever, by their tracks, lengths of their tracks. Little deer, like fawns, have tracks 2.5 inches long, and mature does have hoof that are 3 inches long. And also, yearling bucks are about the same size as a mature doe. Its tracks will be 3 inches long too. But a 2.5-year-old buck, his tracks will be 3 5/8 inches in length. I mean, 3 5/8. 3 5/8 inches. So that's a 2.5-year-old buck. But when you get up to 3 3 3/4 to 4 inches, you're looking at tracks of a big buck. And then when deer are feeding, they're not just walking on a trail, they're walking every which way out there where all the food is. And so they're off-trail tracks, you know, and you see tracks here and there, and they're not in a straight line, and if you find droppings out there, you know, there's 2 places where there are a lot of droppings in the woods made by deer. One is in the feeding area, and the other one is the bedding area. And in the bedding area, because first thing they do when they get up after bedding is empty their balls, so there's going to be droppings here and there in the bedding area. So in feeding areas too, you'll go out there and you find lots of tracks off trail, zigzagging, and droppings. A deer will empty its balls several times while feeding, and so you'll find that out there. Now, the droppings are as reliable as tracks for identifying bucks. Now, in the fall, and that being in September, not all bucks, it'd be true of all bucks, but most of them by the end of September, their droppings will be clumped. They're kind of sticky and they stick together and they form clumps, but the individual droppings in those clumps tell you about the size of the deer. And if they're 1/2 inch, that's either going to be a doe or a yearling buck, but if they're longer than that, it's a buck 2.5 to 6.5 years of age. Very few bucks survive their 7th winter, so that's why we're talking about those age groups. But when you go out there and find 4-inch tracks and droppings that are, say, 7/8 inch or 1 inch in length out there and clumped out in this area, this scattered area, off trail, you've found a feeding area. You have. And chances are, when you're out there scouting and you find one set of tracks like that, or it might seem like there's only one, because it can be hard to find those tracks out there on that grass, especially if it's deep. But droppings are easier to spot out there at that point. But if you're here and if you find one set of tracks and droppings that size there, chances are all the deer living in the surrounding square, all the bucks, antlered bucks, including yearling bucks, gather there during feeding time, feeding hours, feed together, because late in the feeding cycle they want to battle one another and get their pecking order all set up. So this is when they're going to be doing a lot of it in September. So ideally is to find where these bucks are feeding. Now you don't want to be putting your stand out in the middle of a feeding area. And now a feeding area also might be a stand of oaks. And usually those acorns start falling out of oak trees on a windy day right at the end of August and into September. So right now, deer could be really busy eating acorns. It's a good time for acorns. So you look for that too. If you've got stands of acorns to produce, well, any kind of acorn. It doesn't, you know, white oak acorns are their favorite, and they're really nutritious for whitetails. But in my hunting area, all we got is red oak acorns, and they're just little things, but our deer think they're wonderful, like candy. So if you got a good acorn crop this year, boy, look for that as well. And for those tracks off trail, you know, spend a little time walking around out there looking at these things, and I'm sure you're putting trail scent on there, but your trail scent is only going to last about 4 days, then it's gone. So you can do that early. But now, next thing to do, when you find, let's say you find such a feeding area, and say, oh boy, this is one of those places, you know, you're going to be surprised. You get out there and And you're out there early in the morning, and here's a buck, and there's a buck, and there's a buck, and geez, bucks all over the place. You think you're in buck heaven, and they're all over the place. Now, one of the worst things to do, we've learned over the years, boy, you know, every year, as long as I can remember, I've been hunting deer since I was 10 years old. That means, what is that? It's for 77, this 77th season coming up for me. But in the last, 32 years, a major concern of us, where we only hunt older bucks, you know, mature bucks. Our major concern is to keep being well concealed, well hidden at a stand site. And we've learned over the years that we can do a better job of being well hidden at ground level than at tree stands. But we still use tree stands too. We kind of go back and forth. But the main thing is to be really well hidden in there, because you're dealing with a class of bucks, those bigger ones, that are very, very good today at spotting hunters in trees. They've been doing it since the mid-'80s. None of them grew that long, but all their lives, and these 4.5 to 6.5-year-olds, they're that age because they are very good at spotting hunters in trees. And if you're sitting right next to feeding area, they could be feeding right down there in front of you. You just can't wait till they're right there and you can shoot right there. And that sometimes happens. But we've learned that if we stay back in the woods about 10 yards or more, and not the tree right next to the feeding area, if we stay back in there about 10 to 20 yards, and we might not be able to see all over the place like a lot of hunters want to be able to do nowadays, but we'll be a lot better hidden up there, and especially if we made it a point to be sit where you got lots of cover around you. You know, here's a picture of one of my sons preparing a tree stand for bow hunting before our hunting season. There he is in his tree, and he's sawing branches off all the way up to way above his head, so he can stand up and shoot his bow. And back in the old days, you know, we always go to the range and you're always shooting standing up, and you feel like you can't, that's the only way you can shoot a bow. Well, that isn't true. We've learned in my family to shoot while sitting down, shooting a bow sitting down, and having an angle like this, so you can pull, and you can come full draw this way, this side, and shoot over there. So we're sitting here, but the feeding area is over there. And we've learned too that rather than having a whole wide area in front of us wide open, we'll see a lot more deer up close if we're well hidden and just shoot through natural openings in the cover between me, this 10 to 20 yard area between here and the feeding area, so you get back in there. Otherwise, you know, if you're not well hidden, if your silhouette is this big black thing that looks like a human up in the tree, those older bucks are going to spot you within the first hour, 1 to 3 hours you sit in that tree stand. From that time, you won't see any more big bucks near that tree stand. You want to get well concealed. Well concealed is one of the most important things you have to do. You have to be well concealed if you're going to hunt big bucks. And you should expect, even then, that stand site might be only good for one chance. But make it a good stand site where you do have that one chance, because those big bucks are very good. We've been dealing with big bucks for years. And it's true everywhere. You got, I don't know how many bow hunters there are out there. Let's say there's 7 or 8 million bow hunters out there on where you hunt, or this, when you go out there. That's a lot of bow hunters. Those bucks that have been surviving bow hunting periods have learned, what it means is those particular bucks have learned to stay away from hunters and tree stands. And they're always looking for that dark silhouette in the tree, like that picture of my son there. Here's another picture of me for bow hunting. This was for hunting bear, but it's the same process. Look at the kind of place I like to be in. Look how well concealed my silhouette is against the sky when you look up there where I am, sitting in these evergreen trees. And my sons, who still do a lot of bow hunting early, that's their number one thing. They like to, they have a couple ways of making sure they're going to be really concealed up there, especially their silhouette. So it is an easy spot. If bucks see something real dark and big in a tree over there, they aren't going to question about whether that's a human or not. So, now you know what I would do. if I was going to be out there bow hunting early this year, before all the leaves are down and you get out there and you can't wait to go deer hunting, I would try to locate an area where bucks are feeding now, because that's where they're going to congregate twice a day, early in the morning, late in the day, for feeding, and they want to be there together so they can test their antlers and their ability to battle late in feeding cycles. That doesn't mean that, but it just means like in the morning you might see them feeding, and all of a sudden, gee, there's a fight going on over there between a couple of them. And it was really funny, sometimes when that happens, a buck over here will run over there and they want to be close and watch the fight. That can happen. But anyway, that's where I would want to be. And another thing, if you're going to hunt in one place more than once, more than a half day, for example, and nowadays it's getting to be more important to be there for up to 3 days because of global warming, but I won't go into that now. But nowadays, always hunt crosswind. Now, if the wind changes, don't take a chance. If you got only one tree stand and the wind's wrong and the wind's blowing out there to where the deer are going to be feeding, that's no good. And if any of those bucks walk out there, they smell you right. That's the end of that spot. You won't see them feeding there anymore the rest of the hunting season. You don't want that to happen. And you don't want to be downwind unless you're going to only hunt there once. Because the next time those deer come there, like later today, your trail scent will be there to warn them it's fresh. And they're going to smell it, uh-oh, we're going to go hunt, we're going to go feed somewhere else. And from that time on, all those bucks will go somewhere else to feed. So you don't want that to happen. So you want to be crosswind. Now, it's not quite crosswind. Like, here's the wind blowing from, like, say, I'm facing the feeding areas right here. Now, it might be corn, or it might be soybeans, it might be alfalfa, it might be hay, just a pasture. But whatever, here it is out in front of me. I want the wind blowing toward me from one side or the other, but more at an angle. Well, like, if it's coming at me this way at an angle, so it's blowing right toward this cheek here, going that way, that's perfect, because this area downwind is going to be spreading out. And if you're right there next to that feeding area, and your scent is blowing out there, any deer that get into that downwind scent vector out there spreading out in the field will goof it up right away for you. Any deer getting that, oh, there's a human over there. You don't want that to happen. But if you're crosswind, that won't happen. And deer coming, when they come to a feeding area, they always come from downwind, they're going to smell your fresh trail scent there. And if you haven't been worried about trail scent up to this point, I didn't know that was a problem or whatever. I'm never worried about that. Well, if you want to hunt big bucks, you start worrying about that right now. That's going to be an important feature of your buck hunting from now on. And the same way with wind direction. You never take a chance on it. Yeah. So it's a good idea to have more than one stand site. Like one of the ways that I like to do it, let's say I have a special trail, which I do. I'm going to be hunting this fall when breeding is going on, when big bucks are searching for does and heat. But you can have a trail on this side of that trail, you know, and crosswind. And let's say the next day the doggone wind switched around, now your scent is blowing toward that trail, and you can't hunt there then. Well, at least 100 yards away from this spot, 100 yards or more even, maybe 200-300 yards, I'll cross that trail, or the area where the trail goes through, and I'll go around to a stand site on the other side of the trail. Maybe not right across from where you were sitting, but down this way or over that way. So that when that wind changes, you can again be crosswind of that trail. Now, when you got two stand sites in different areas facing toward one, you know, and one this way and the other one facing the opposite direction, this one is facing this way and this one is this way, you can always hunt at one of those with a crosswind or downwind wind direction. Now, if your trail going to that site is going through the woods and the feeding area is here, because those deer always be coming to the feeding area from downwind, like I said before, you want to be crosswind. So anyway, the point here is have more than one stand site facing in different directions. So you say, oh man, I want to go back to that feeding area. I saw all those bucks this morning and I can't wait to go back there. If that wind switches, you want to have a stand site or two, maybe even three, in different areas that will give you the chance to get there from crosswind and sit crosswind, no matter what direction the wind is blowing. And that's the kind of stuff you got to do when you're a buck hunter. You can't be lazy if you want to be a regularly successful buck hunter. And these are some of the things you got to be able to do if you're going to be regularly successful at it. So, with that, there. Now you know where to hunt in September. Now, watering spots, if it's hot and dry where you're on, drought going on, watering spots are always good. Look for spots where there are a lot of deer tracks, especially some big ones, like say 4-inch tracks going down to the water there in the mud. Oh, this is a spot. You want to be crosswind there again too. Another thing you might consider, it's worthwhile, and I'll be talking a lot more about it in my next book, is using a pop-up ground blind, which gives you absolute 100% concealment at ground level. If the thing is covered with a camo pattern that matches well with the area you hunt, and you have it sufficiently hidden so that its bulk, its silhouette isn't obvious. That's a lot of other things to learn. I'll talk about that another time. But at any rate, now you know where to hunt in September, and be a lot of mosquitoes when you hunt in September, and those little gnats, you know, those little claws. But anyway, but best of luck to you. And here's another thing, another tip. Your best chance to take a big buck is at a stand site you've never used before for the first time. Now, if you got all these tracks and droppings out here, everything like we just talked about, your best chance to take a big buck at that spot is the first 1 to 3 hours you hunt there. Now, if anything happens that makes you think that buck or a couple of bucks or bucks over there, they know you're there because they smelled you, move, go to a different stand site, at least, you know, come back in the afternoon, but go to a different one. If you just keep going to the same spot, you're just making it so easy for those bucks to stay away from you. Don't let that happen. Another way, you can't be lazy when you're hunting big. Go to a different one with the same qualifications for what constitutes a mature buck effective stand site. You know all about that now. You know, and don't be overwhelmed by saying, oh, that's too much work. Maybe I don't even want to hunt big bucks. That's silly. Once you learn to do this, you'll start doing this automatically. You won't hardly even think about it. You'll just keep doing that the rest of your life, and you'll think, I wouldn't dare go out there unless I do these things, and you just do it automatically. And that's the way you're going to be if you're going to be regularly successful at taking older bucks. Now, if any deer is all you want, well, you don't have to be that careful. But even so, you'll see a lot more of those other any deer if you do the same things. This is just a much better, more sophisticated way to hunt, and you'll be a lot more successful. Just before you click up, hold on a minute. Do me a favor. You know, I really need this favor because it's important on YouTube seminars. I want you to hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you a thing, and you'll get a message every time I come up with a new seminar, so you know it's on there and you can see it right away if you want. But it's not going to bother you in any way. And the other thing is, hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed what you heard today. And I hope you did. I hope you realize Doc just gave you the darndest advice about hunting older bucks in September. If I was going out there today, this is exactly what I would do, just like what I told you. So, anyway, another thing too, you know, anytime you guys get any questions, you know, you want to know more about this or you're not sure about something, feel free to follow up with a question on YouTube, ask me any question you want, and I'll give you an answer as soon as I can. Sometimes I'm loaded with those things, or I'm really busy, but I try to keep up with them all the time. So anytime you want, just give me a call, and I'll send you a message. It'll be on YouTube. You'll find it on there, my answer, my reply to what your question was. So I'm glad to do that. I mean, after all, I want to teach you to be a great hunter. And if there's any question, you know, where things aren't working out for you, I sure want to help you rectify that. So be sure to do that. So with that, good luck, guys. I wish you the best luck, and I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.